At the end of this lecture, we would have had first corrected a mistake, a small mistake that we made from the previous video. It's about the flip-flop nodes. We're going to replace that with a traditional branch node, and I'll explain why once we get into the engine. And then we would have added an exit point for the character inside the Seahawk blueprint. Now the exit point is going to serve as a spawn point for the player to spawn after he exits the vehicle, because at the moment when we are entering the vehicle, we are not actually putting the character inside the vehicle. We are hiding him, and we are also disabling all the collisions on him, so he stays where he enters from. He always stays there until he chooses to exit, and that's when we will be spawning him to that exit point that we'll be adding inside the Seahawk blueprint. Now that exit point is going to be a simple billboard component, right? And that'll just serve as a position and a location indicator. Then we would have created a function for exiting the vehicle, a function which we wrote similar to the one for entering the vehicle. That's the main essence of this video. And finally, we would have resumed our character pawn. We are respawned, if you may, our character pawn to that point after we exit the vehicle, so that we can control him again and we can enter the vehicle, exit, enter, and exit. So we'll also test that out. All right, let's do this. Back in the editor, the first thing you have to do is get inside the third person character blueprint. If you haven't opened that up, you can go over to the third person BP blueprints, and this is the one, right? So in the previous video, we wrote this function and we added a flip-flop node. Now the problem with a flip-flop node is when it's inside a function, when the function ends either here or here, it resets the flip-flop node back to A. Okay, so when it resets, no matter how many times you call, it's never gonna flip and flop. It's always gonna call A. It's never gonna call B. So once you call the function, it's gonna call A. That will work fine. But when you want this to be executed the next time this function is called, this will never be called because it resets back to A, right? So the first thing is we have to get rid of the flip-flop node and replace that with our traditional branch node. I'm going to get rid of this, and then in here I will be adding an input pin which will be a boolean flag, and I'll simply call this hide and question mark. Do we want to hide this character or not? And then we branch this out into a branch node, and very simple, we're just going to connect the true here and connect the false here. So if it's hidden is true, if we want to hide this, then we go and hide and do all of these things for the character. Otherwise we do something else. So this is being called inside the AA player controller, and if you look at the game input, this is where we are calling it. There it is. So no, not this one. So I think if you are looking inside, yeah, there it is. So inside the game in the custom events, we have this function called start entering vehicle. Inside here, this is where we are calling this function. So let's click on hide because we want to hide him, and let's see if this works. I'm gonna hit play, and I'm gonna go over and jump above the wings and land straight in here, and I'll hit E to enter the vehicle. There you go. So that works. Okay, now of course the E does not work again because that's what we're gonna write now. Okay, so escape out of that. Now let's add that exit point in our Seahawk blueprint. So going over to Seahawk underscore BP, inside, let me open up the viewport. Inside the Seahawk body, I'm going to add a new component. I'm going to look for billboard. Okay, and that's it. All this billboard does is, if I can simply scroll this out and place it somewhere here like this. So this is simply a point in space for your reference, so you can use that as a placeholder point for spawning things or moving things to that point, as simple as that. And it has an image to indicate its presence in the world. Alright, so now let's just position it somewhere like that. I think I'll just give it a height of 20, right? And let's make this 300 and 610. That's okay. So we want him to be spawning or respawning. Well, technically it's not a respawn because we're not killing the character, we are only hiding the character, and we're also disabling all the collisions on him. Okay, so we would rather say making him reappear from the vehicle onto this point. This is where he's going to face, and also we have to turn his collision and everything else on. So that's for a later stage, but for now this is the point that we have. And compile and save, and let's give this a name, and I'll call this exit point, character exit point, character exit point. Compile and save that. Now that we have this billboard set up, the billboard point set up, let's jump to a player controller, and this is where we had created a function. This is a custom event, so let's write another function, and this is going to be for start exiting vehicle, right? So I'll say custom event, and I'll say start, I'll zoom in a bit, start exiting vehicle, right? And we're gonna need a couple of boolean flags as well, a duplicate of entering vehicle, so control W, and we say exiting vehicle, right? So these are the question marks variables, and this is just a flag that holds things. Okay, so now inside start exiting vehicle, let's look for has entered vehicle again. So we are going to bring this branch node out here with the condition as whether or not the has entered vehicle is true. And in our case, in the first case where we are trying to enter the vehicle, we want to check whether the player has already entered the vehicle or not. If he's not entered the vehicle, then make him enter the vehicle. In our this case, it's going to be the opposite. If he has already entered the vehicle, he wants to exit it, so we have to check against the true condition here. No, the false will be left as it is, right? So it's going to be pretty much the same code, except we just have to bring in a couple of new variables, the time variables. So first is I will be time, this is time required to enter. It's like a variable which gets reset, and it gets filled again with values, and it's reset at the end of some cycle. So we will use this variable as a common one for both entering and exiting. So we'll say time required to enter or exit, okay, and that's the name of the variable there. And then we'll say time spent entering, that is, no, we actually revert this variable. I apologize. This is going to be time required to enter, and we need a copy of this variable, which will be called time required to exit, okay, which will be coming in from Seahawk. And if you recall, time required to enter comes in from Seahawk inside these on component begin overlap functions or the events. Okay, so once the trigger detects that a character has entered, it turns on a boolean flag, and it also sets the time required to enter, and the time required to enter is here, which we have to enter manually. So we will duplicate this variable out here as well, and we'll call this time required to exit. Now if it takes in 3 seconds for entering the Seahawk, let's make this 1.5 seconds to exit the Seahawk. Alright, gonna be faster. Now let's bring a copy of that by hitting Control W, duplicating the control reference, player controller reference, and let's set the time required to exit, which is coming in from the player controller. Now this is going to contain this variable, this value, the value from this variable, that is time required to exit, which is 1.5 seconds, right? And we will not zero this out here because that will reset this back, and it might lead to funny results. So saving that and moving back to a player controller. Now let's bring let's rename this variable to time spent entering, exiting. Okay, so which is a generic for both. Compile and save. Now let's bring in this code out here, and let's copy all of this, and this is entry exit timer. I think we should bring in everything until this point, and let's also bring that. Yeah, for now we'll just bring those nodes in, and I'll hit control, I don't need this, I'll hit control W, duplicate it, and I'll just move this up a bit so that it can align with the true pin like this. So if it's true, if the player has entered the vehicle, he is inside the vehicle. Now we want him to get out of the vehicle, so this is the function that's going to get called. Time spent entering, exiting. Now time required to enter will be replaced with time required to exit, which is coming in from the Seahawk. Okay, and if this is greater than this time required to exit, greater than equal to, and it says has entered the vehicle. So first is we'll get rid of has entered the vehicle, and we'll say has exited vehicle, which is true. Okay, compile, save. uh, Next we have to bring in all of these nodes till the point of this. Okay, we won't get the player pawn because at this point the player pawn has changed to Seahawk, and you cannot really cast that to the third person character, so that will always fire off the cast failed, or the cast will never go through. So with those 4 nodes selected, I'm going to hit Control W, duplicate it. Everything stays the same here. uh, Clear text notification, reset progress bar, and also we have to bring in the character visibility. We have to toggle the character visibility. Now we don't have a reference to the player pawn because we have unpossessed from the player pawn, and we have possessed the Seahawk reference. So the new pawn right now, or the new player pawn right now, is the Seahawk ref. Alright, so what we do is we actually save the reference to the player pawn, the character pawn, in the event begin play right before anything goes on in this blueprint. In the event begin play, we will be saving a reference to the character pawn so that we can use that much later, and it's going to be most essential at this point. So I'm going to get the player pawn in event begin play. This is event begin play. At the end of everything, we have to add the get player pawn, and then we cast this to third person character, and then we make a reference out of this and promote to a variable. let's call this let's call this variable character pawn ref. Okay, now let's save these things in its own categories called references, and we will add the Seahawk ref inside the references as well, like that. Now we have the character pawn reference. Let's see whether it even shows up, right? Whether we have the right one. Is it null? Let's check that out. A quick test before we move on. Compile, save, play. Yep, it works. If you missed it, towards the top left it says third person character, so that works, right? So I'm gonna get rid of that, compile and save, go back to custom events. Now I'll just make some modifications here. It We are casting to third person character, and we are casting it successfully, but we don't have to do that anymore because we now have a reference to the player character pawn reference. We are to the character pawn. So I'm going to select these 2 nodes, and I'm going to hit delete. I'll connect that right away. Now the target is going to be, I'll just move this back. The target is going to be the character pawn reference. I'm going to connect that here. That's it. Now we don't have to cast this anymore because we already have a reference variable. Now we'll do the same thing here. We will get toggle character visibility. We do not want this. We want this. We want these 2 nodes, which we will change. I'm gonna connect these, right? And we don't want to hide this, we want to show this. And unpossessed is going to be get player controller. We want to unpossess the player controller, the current player controller, and the pawn in possession, the new pawn in possession, should be back to character pawn ref, like that. It's very straightforward. In this case it was Seahawk. In this case we are back to character pawn. Okay, so now you just go back and check out the false pin, and if you look at this, we are setting the progress bar percentage. Same code, exact same code from this function, except here this is going to change from time required to enter to time required to exit. That's it. Simple. Compile and save. Now let's go back to our game input and let's check here. Now in this case we are checking for player can enter. If it's true, then we are doing all of this. If it's false, so we're not doing anything. So we first want to make sure that what we want to add, the code that we want to add, or the function that we want to call for exiting the vehicle is going to be inside the false pin, inside the false condition. So let's first confirm that and then we'll go ahead with it. Okay, I'll just add a quick print string out here, and I won't bother changing anything here. I'll just compile and save, and I'll run over. I'll first enter this vehicle. I'm inside the Seahawk. Now if I hit E, I can see hello being printed. So which means that we have to write a code in the false condition. Perfect. Now I'll just move this back. In fact, I'll move the entire thing. No, I won't move them back. I'll just move them a little bit to the right because the false nodes are going to come down here. Now for the false, it's going to be pretty much the same. We will bring in this entire, all these nodes. In fact, we'll just bring in all of these nodes here, and we'll just hit Control W and we'll change them as per we need it, right? So I'll just put them here, connect that to the false, and that's fine. We want to hide the progress bar. We entering vehicle, instead of entering vehicle, it's going to be exiting vehicle. Okay, and this is going to be true. So at this point we are still exiting the vehicle, and again this will be checked against exiting vehicle, right? And this will be replaced by the second function that we just created, start exiting vehicle, just like that. Okay, and then connect that to this and we should be done. Everything else stays the same. Now go back inside the start exiting vehicle and let's just check time spent entering. That's perfect. Time required to exit, we have the right variables for exiting. Set progress bar %. All right, and when it's done, we have entered the vehicle, and we have entered the, we have not entered the vehicle, we have exited the vehicle. Okay, and then we are zeroing out the time spent entering or exiting. We are doing all of this, resetting the progress bar, hiding the progress bar, clearing the text notification, and we do not want to hide him, we want to show him, so we are keeping the hide checkbox unchecked. Then we unpossess the Seahawk. At this point it's Seahawk, so we unpossess that, and then we possess the character pawn reference. Let's see if this works. Play. It won't work yet because if you go over to, let's say, we have not modified this function yet. Okay, so if you look at this function, we don't have anything for the false, right? If you want to show him, what are we going to do? All we're doing is get the new hidden and do not check it, so we're just showing him, that's all. So we have to do this, all of these things in reverse. So I'll use the same references and I'll first activate it. I'll first activate the capsule component, then I'll activate the mesh. Okay, then I'll get the capsule component, I'll enable its collisions, enable set collision enabled, and from no collision I'm going to change this to collision enabled and query and physics. Also the mesh also needs to get its set its collision enabled. Connect that, change this to collision enabled and query and physics. Now there's more to this. We won't just make him appear out of the blue. We have to make him appear on that billboard reference point that we created inside the Seahawk blueprint. Now how do we get to the Seahawk blueprint from here? We already have a reference. I believe we have a reference to the player controller. If we don't need to actually save that reference anywhere. We'll just get the player controller and then we say cast to AA player controller, because this is not happening in update, or it's not going to happen all the time, so we can afford to cast it. Right, and then as AA player controller we get the Seahawk reference. Okay, and then from Seahawk reference we get this particular billboard component. Character exit point is what it's called. So we'll get the character exit point. That should be right at the below, right down at the below. There you go. And now we have the character exit point. So we'll get its transform, get a world transform, and all we want to use from this world transform is the location and the location and the rotation. We don't need the scale. Now we will bring in, or we'll just call the teleport node. Teleport is something that simply teleports you. Very handy node. I'll just first connect that here. Okay, teleport the character onto this location and looking at this rotation. Alright, compile and save. Now let's go back, or let's just play from here. Now I'm gonna jump and land on the trigger, enter the vehicle. There you go. Now if I exit the vehicle, perfect. Okay, now the only thing is maybe the billboard point is a little too high, so I'm just gonna stick him to the ground like this. Compile and save. Let's try this out. Got it. And hit E again. Perfect. Right? I'll see you in the next section and the next video. Thank you.